everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Longevity Lounge. Today we have Dr. Bethany Tennant on, and we had a fantastic conversation with her.
Yes, she is a board certified naturopath physician, and she's worked with a wide range of people, ranging from just regular folk to athletes in the NBA and NFL. And we had a great conversation about that and how to simplify health and longevity.
Yeah, we talk everything from supplements, your diet, your microbiome, and how she uses Beamer in her practice and how athletes work with different tools in recovery. So we're so excited to dive into this conversation. Let's get started.
Yeah. It's such a pleasure to have such an expert on these subjects to dive into longevity and to learn a little bit about you and your career and hopefully offer some great information to our audience. And I think where we want to start is, well, you kind of started off as an athlete yourself. You work with athletes right now. But how did you evolve from being an athlete yourself to work with athletes right now and finding yourself in this current position in your career?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. In terms of kind of being a former athlete and then kind of leaning into that community, I think it was just my natural interest. While I was going to medical school, I started working at a gym performance facility and started creating connections and just sharing, this is what I'm learning, this is what I'm excited about. And then it turned into, oh, that's cool. Can you talk to my team? Can you come to this camp? And then kind of built from there, from helping trainers with their athletes and speaking at colleges um, and beyond. I guess that's a little bit of just sort of putting myself in the communities that had a connection to either being active or athletes and sharing my, passion for helping and learning ways that I could support either teams or individuals. So that's kind of how it started.
You played college basketball, right?
Yes, right.
Amazing. So do you prefer working with basketball players more?
I would say I think it's just the sport that I'm the most familiar with in terms of what it looks like, what the season entails, what the recruiting process might look like, summer camp showcase, and at the highest level, a little bit understanding of sort of summer league into preseason and the draft and all of that. So I think it's just because I'm very familiar, but I love working with athletes in any sport, and part of what I enjoy is actually learning more of like the details of their training or the extent of, different skills that they're working on that are new to me. So that's also a fun thing.
And I'm sure, like, I have a few friends through medical school, and I always ask them this because I'm like, there's so many subjects to dive into. Well, obviously, you had first-hand experience being a basketball player, playing, yourself, probably having some physical therapy and being open up to performance and recovery. But what was it about working with athletes specifically? I mean, there's so many things you could have gone into, but recovery, preventative care, what drew you to that?
Yeah, I think I see a little bit of a gap in the way that athletes are often supported in their health and performance, and it's often very siloed. It's very much strength and conditioning, it's skills, and sometimes a nutrition component. But I really feel like oftentimes that whole athlete approach is what can be missing, and understanding ways that we can support the body and support their health for performance. And it's kind of similar to any patients that I help too, sort of a whole person approach. But for athletes, I think thinking through your mental health and understanding these daily things that give us indicators about how you might be performing, like your sleep and bowel movements and mood and appetite and all these little pieces and nuances that can connect the dots for overall health. That's then for performance. And sometimes that can be really separated, like just really focusing on numbers and stats as opposed to like, let's optimize your health to optimize that, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure working with, I mean, like you said, you've worked with a range of people from kind of just regular folks to elite level athletes. I mean, you've worked with obviously the best of the best. Have you gained insight from working with individuals like that on what is possible with the human body? And I'm sure working with that level, you've seen people go beyond their physical limits, or they see maybe their health and their recovery differently. What insights have you gained from working with athletes like that, and how has it informed your practice?
I guess there's a few things. I think one would be one thing that I was surprised by is that oftentimes really elite athletes are very, genetically gifted, just amazing at what they do, and they almost can get away with eating
Totally.
kind of they might have almost like bad habits in a way of going from college to going to professional and eating fast food and staying up late and like these types of things that I would consider foundational. So sometimes it's almost those are the things that we're looking at supporting as reducing some of, your sugar cravings and just eating whatever you want because you can do that and then you still score 30 points, right? So part of what I've learned is what you all, really are speaking on is the longevity. And I think about career longevity. And then it's the conversation of you're doing great now, but let's think about injury prevention. Let's think about your whole career and how to sustain performing at this level. So I think that's almost like a surprise that some of these healthy habits that maybe a lot of other people that are health conscious are or would be surprised by maybe.
Hmm.
Then on the other side of it, I think the level of either dedication and resilience, especially when it comes to recovering from an injury and returning to competition, or just the mindset and discipline is just always, impressive and in that way. So I think those are a few things that I would take away is sometimes there's a gap in foundational, and then sometimes there's just next level sense of commitment and resilience and discipline around things.
Yeah.
Totally.
And I'm sure as well. I mean, are you familiar? There's a guy called Brian Johnson. He's like famous for trying to never die. He wants to like live forever.
Yes, I do know what
I
you're talking
find
about.
him so fascinating as a person and like how he approaches longevity. Because I think in a world of social media where we can see everyone's routines and celebrities' routines and
Yeah.
these health experts, it's informative. But I think, I'm sure, like you were saying, I mean, athletes have this next level approach, this kind of extremity of I need to recover, I need to perform at my absolute best. And I'm sure some people being in the social media space, just seeing all this, like, wow, this is pretty intense. Like, I don't know if I can follow all of this. I mean, they've got the money to invest in these things. And I think sometimes they probably wonder, like, well, how do I just know and feel reassured that what I'm doing is good enough? Because I don't know if I have the money to, like, wake up, go in my cold plunge, do red light therapy, and then go over here and that. So, what would you say are kind of just foundational things that are just non negotiable, that are just things that if you do this, you're going to be great?
Yeah, I think there's absolutely foundational things that I talk with patients about and in like corporate wellness settings that these are just like foundational things that can be helpful for everybody. And it's really thinking about how you're nourishing your body, so what nutrition looks like. And of course, there can be bio-individuality within each of these, but nourishing your body well, getting in movement, exercise, activity, whatever that looks like for you. I think prioritizing quality sleep is major, and then stress management. And I think there's certainly other aspects of sort of that community or other things around just that health span component as opposed to, not just living long, but living healthy and long. And sometimes it's even things like incorporating things that you look forward to doing, whether it's whatever that looks like, whether it's your bowling league or like a trip or your morning cup of coffee in the sun, whatever that looks like. Those little moments of things to look forward to are such a big part of your mindset and health, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. And do you feel like it's sooner? Like to us, obviously, it feels like everyone is worried about this sooner, like the recovery, their how they can live longer, how they can live healthier. Do you feel like that's popping up sooner that you're seeing that people are worried about that on the front end rather than when they get older?
Yeah, and I think there's certainly patients that are coming in wanting to be, I want to be proactive. That's the mindset. And I want to, let's run the labs. What could be, what are we screening for? What could I be doing better? What could be optimized? Curiosity about genetic testing or metabolic health and hormones. And I think those are all really valuable. I think there's definitely things that we can look to support to kind of encourage optimizing how people feel and live and for as long as they can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And habits are huge, right? I know you mentioned that in the beginning, like the college athletes are like, oh, we're used to eating fast food and all of these things. It kind of makes sense for as you come from a hobby and something maybe you find out you're really good at, turning it into a career, and how you
Right.
can have longevity there is super important.
I think a lot of people have a slightly misguided view on prevention and then fixing health problems. Obviously, a lot of what you do is preventative. You want to help people avoid challenges or health concerns. But I think a lot of people think, well, if I can fix it, then I can probably just wait until I need to fix it, and then they don't actually prevent anything. So, what would you say to someone like that who doesn't understand preventative care in the way that they need to? What's the
Right.
difference, and why is it important?
That's such a great question. I think that would be a really great unlock. But I think for me, the way I share with individuals or patients or athletes is that some of the things that we can detect. So when I think about prevention, I often think about doing like lab work and checking in on other or symptoms. And I think that there can often be things that we can catch in labs that people don't experience as a symptom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a key of the prevention part. And so, for example, for patients with metabolic health, looking at your lipid panel, high cholesterol, and looking at those values, you're not going to have symptoms associated with it. So, it's a good thing to be screening. And then there's a lot of lifestyle things to modify that or support. And when I see with athletes, one thing that comes to mind that can be really helpful for prevention, a lot of research is coming out on how vitamin D status actually can be a really key indicator for like injury risk and recovery from things like concussion, or we're even seeing, I think in NFL players, there was a study of like a risk of hamstring injuries. And it seemed to be there was a correlation with like a vitamin D status. So we think about how nutrients support injury recovery and healing. And when you're competing at that level, how those things need to be kind of at an optimal status. So those are two examples that I think about when I consider labs as a prevention measure and understanding that neither of those really show up as symptoms for people. So it's nothing that you would actually feel like, oh, I need to get this, I need to address this with my physician because there's nothing that you would be experiencing. Um, and I think that there's also things that can be considered sort of in a prevention realm that are maybe more subtle. So things that having a little bit more self-awareness of like, oh, there's something weird's happening, like with my sleep, or I'm realizing this is like something weird with my skin or my gut health. And those little subtle things I think be there can be diagnostic workup to see if there's something else that needs to be supported or prevented from, um, evolving into something worse, I guess. So
Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you brought up supplements. What would you say are supplements that are foundational, maybe things that are most important, most backed by research, things that are going to be most beneficial for someone who takes them? There are a lot of obviously supplements out there that people might play around with and try and see what works. But what have you found has been most foundational, most important?
this is my tagline is like supplement. And so I think food is definitely foundational, other things are foundational, but in terms of sort of nutrition insurance in a way, nutrient insurance, I think a quality multivitamin, I think magnesium is often something that people can be deficient in, vitamin D, probiotics would be some of the things that I would consider as sort of like safe for most people to have as that kind of a nutrient support. And I think probiotics are definitely one of the areas of interest for me as there's more and more research into the microbiome for athletic performance. And we're seeing within the body, there's just such an interesting way that we see interconnectedness. And there's now the gut brain axis, there's the gut skin axis, there's the microbiome, there's interconnectedness between movement and the microbiome and your mitochondria. And so that's the kind of like the research that I'm really interested in these days. So learning kind of how different probiotics and different strains can be utilized in different ways. There's actually newer research on I don't love the name and the term, they call them psychobiotics, but it's a way of basically strains of probiotics that are really supportive for kind of mental health and stress and anxiety. And so that's kind of the next frontier of sort of specification of microbiome support for symptoms and prevention. But those would be kind of, I think, good for everybody. And then beyond that, I certainly think things like the collagen, I think the creatine is getting a lot of focus right now, both for muscle mass, but also a lot as it's supporting mental health.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, and certainly it would matter symptoms, and if you're recovering from an injury, I have a lot other things that I would consider for interventions, but
Yeah.
I love that you say food is foundational, right? Because it makes sense. Like you can't just have McDonald's every day, take a handful of supplements, and hope
Yeah.
everything works out.
right. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I want to chat a little bit about recovery tools. I know you talked a little bit about supplements, talked a little bit about kind of how these athletes are more interested in the front end of like their labs and different things like that, how they can support. What have you seen in your practice as far as recovery tools go? Are people ice bathing? Are they saunaing? What's kind of what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of everything, but in terms of, I think again, like foundational first, sleep is so key. And in fact, a couple years ago, I there was like an NBA franchise, and they were talking. We were in conversation about like how to support their sleep, and at that time, they actually had like an expert come in that like focuses on sleep, and sometimes that's a little bit of it's almost like revealing because you think, oh, these are like professional, these are like at the best, and yet something as simple as like sleep is something that they're still trying to do better. And I think that also can reflect for kind of like everyday people to think about how important it is for mental health and hormones and everything else. So sleep for sure. And I think there's a lot of kind of biohacking in a way around how to optimize that alone. And then beyond that, I definitely think kind of like cold plunge, sauna, any sort of like manual therapy, the tools that help with kind of like muscle tissue, foam rolling, all of those things I think can be helpful. And I also think becoming more of the conversation is also a little bit more like supporting nervous system regulation, breath work, meditation, mindfulness. That's also like a big component. I think that's getting more attention. Um, but I also would say there's also nuance. So using kind of like cold exposure, if you're it can also sort of stunt if you're looking to increase muscle mass. So sometimes it's not always indicated to. So I think there's always like context of things and best application of all the tools. But I think those are some general things that I see being utilized.
Totally.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm a big sauna girl, but I would like to
Yeah.
avoid the cold plunge like the plague
Yeah.
because it is horrible.
Yeah, I feel like
Not a fan.
yeah, the cold plunges, saunas, red light. I feel like there was a moment last year, or maybe it was this year, where it just became suddenly so popular with so many
Yeah.
influencers, podcasters.
Just contrast therapy, like get in the cold plunge, get
Yeah.
in the sauna.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone started doing it, but I don't think they fully knew what they were doing. And they were just like, oh, well, it's got loads of health benefits, but I don't think they could articulate
Yeah.
which health
Sure.
benefits. Um, so that's
I would
interesting.
say, can I say, to speak to that? So it's an interesting thing because as a naturopathic physician, there's a lot of sort of like this really traditional, we call it like nature cure when we're using things like water hydrotherapy. And this is like a very, very old practice of contrast, like hydrotherapy back in like Germany. There was like a physician, Kneipp, and he would do contrast and found to be really helpful for people. So it's just interesting sometimes how it's now like a modern biohack, but oftentimes those things, like collagen and bone broth are actually like very traditional or other cultures have been doing it for so much longer. I would say one sort of everyday application could be ending like a shower with a little bit of cool, and it could even just be like your hands and feet. And part of what it has to do with how it can help with just every day is how it impacts blood flow. And
Mm.
so that's one consideration.
Well, blood flow is so important. I think we know and support that wholeheartedly. You mentioned when we were chatting earlier that you have a beamer in your clinic. What kind of has been your experience with that?
Yeah, so we utilize it for kind of supporting that microcirculation, but we have it in combination with our IV therapy treatments. And so it's a really great way for patients to kind of double benefit in a way. So in the chair that they're using, the beamer is there, they're able to utilize that and then get potentially an IV for just kind of optimizing their health. So sometimes it's a high dose vitamin C, magnesium, and I've used it myself. I think it can be really helpful just for kind of like if I have a gap between patients, going in there can just be a nice like stress reset. So that's a little bit of my experience.
In regards to dealing with stress, anxiety, pressure, whatever it might be, though people don't see any of the side effects on the surface, there's things happening in the body that might actually be quite detrimental to their longevity and their health. What is it that's going on inside the body, and why is it important to manage that early on?
I think that's a great point to think about how stress can impact us in ways that maybe we're not even aware of. And so, what I often see is there's two things. Again, I think there's the subtle symptoms that can change, and then there's the labs that we see a little bit more what's going on. And I think the body is such an orchestra. So there's such an orchestra of hormones and how they, again, the interconnectedness. So, how things impact one organ, system, gland, often impact multiple. And so lots of times the subtle symptoms could be things like, oh, frequent headaches, or I'm getting migraines more often, or either I don't have an appetite or I'm actually always hungry. So sometimes those little things, or having changes in bowel movements, can be like stress, I find, can show up for people in kind of unique ways. People can kind of, some people it's like always in their stomach, some people carry it in their shoulders, some people eat. And so those little things I think can be subtle symptoms. And what's really happening is we see a lot of stress impacts, which is called the HPA axis. So it's the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal. Sometimes we see that either being really low or really high. And I think the sort of the stress can be emotional, it can be positive stress, people getting married or relocating or getting a new job. And sometimes we see how that can impact either the hormones or cytokines or inflammation processes. And so those are the ways that I I think about addressing them, supporting people individually, and then lab work that gives us more information and maybe how to create any sort of like treatment plan or intervention for them.
Mm.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I honestly, just this is really random, but on this topic, I was talking about how not too long ago, I had a friend of mine kind of asked me a little bit about because I'm originally from the UK, and he was asking me about kind of the culture around mental health, dealing with stress, whatever it might be. And I was like, yeah, well, have you heard of the quote, keep calm, carry on? Like, that's kind of England's thing. It's like on every mug and every, like, whatever it might be. Like, I feel like in Western culture, being in the US, there's such a open discussion about mental health, about stress, about anxiety. And I felt like in the UK, it's there, but definitely not as prevalent. And even I have other friends in Europe who just don't really seem to talk about it at all. They don't really seem to be aware of it. But it did kind of open me up into how different cultures and countries approach mental health and their health in general. Have you worked with, obviously you've had some experience, not just in the US, but kind of abroad. Have you seen different approaches to health and mental health that you've found fascinating or worth diving into a little bit? Has there been any insight from that experience?
I think that is such a great question. There's like so many things to consider within that question. Um, it also reminds me, I've had patients as well that maybe for whatever country of origin, religion, also there certainly can be reluctance around addressing even like mental health or anxiety, or fear around any medication that might be associated with supporting those things. And so I think those are all really great things to be like cognizant of in general, just that there's potentially different lenses and frameworks of understanding health and how to meet people with where they're at. And then in terms of my experience internationally, I think I guess in the positive way, I would say that I think what I recognize so much is just how community is so much more of a focus than individual. That is so just really praised and sort of idealized, just to be able to do everything on your own and make it on your own and do all these things and take care of, versus that sort of like community connection involvement, which is really an aspect of health. And I think we're also seeing that show up in almost like that loneliness component that we're seeing in the US at times as well. In terms of, um, I think I'm always just interested with my passion for like nutrition and understanding. I'm also very interested in the cultural components around food, and I think um, there's a few experiences that are coming to mind. One, I worked with an elite basketball player who's now playing professionally overseas. Originally, his family is from Alaska, and I had the opportunity, family was visiting here in Portland, and they invited me to a dinner, and they had brought with them some of like the whale that they had harvested from the village that they do as a community. They, like
Wow.
distribute whale meat amongst each other. And I think someone in the family had also gone hunting, and there was like a caribou meat stew that we had. That experience was so special to me because I realized how uh, it was such a like a inner circle moment for me to be invited to participate. And it also makes me think about how, whale isn't going to be part of a meal plan. So, like, there's always like cultural and religious components that go beyond like a chicken and broccoli recommendation for a meal. So this is getting a little bit tangential here, but I think cultural context is so interesting. And that experience was just very special. And then some of my experience in South America, especially when I did the Peace Corps, and so much of the food wasn't familiar to me, some of the vegetables and what they were using. And so it was such a learning experience. I was there as a community health educator to work in partnership with the community, but so much of it was me learning and understanding what was going on there. So to answer your question, I think in terms of like
No,
mental health, like, yeah, there's just so many components I think um of health, and we think about mental health, physical health, nutrition, cultural, community. Those are all really interesting aspects, and I think there is a lot to learn from each other.
Yeah, whale. That is
that's
amazing. I
incredible.
can't even imagine if that was like, yeah, just have 1 cup of veggies, 1 cup of whale, 1 cup of whatever. I'm like, I don't even know how I would.
That's so cool. But
Yeah,
the community part is so important too, because I
yeah,
feel like that is such a cornerstone of longevity. Having community, having people around you. It seems that that's something that kind of gets forgotten about, but it's so important. And I think food, as silly as it is, and as funny as the anecdote of whale is in this conversation, it makes a lot of sense because food oftentimes is a bring together
yeah,
of people.
yeah.
Yeah, we are the Beamer office is actually headquartered in Liechtenstein, and so in September, myself and a couple of our coworkers went over to Berlin for our convention over there, and then for to Liechtenstein. And I was like, "Give me all the schnitzel, give me all the spatzel, give me all of the things," because it is just so fun to eat food and be around community and culture like that. It's just so cool to immerse yourself in it, and I think it's really important.
Yeah, and it is cool. Yeah, and I think it kind of we're kind of ending on this note of subjectivity a little bit, because I think obviously there's not going to be a broad objective like one size fits all. This is perfect for everyone. It's going to be very personalized and subjective. And I think there are so many components of longevity, like you were talking about, that are so important. And I think for anyone who is trying to find a plan or a routine that they can follow, that they feel good about, it's going to be quite subjective and personal. But to be able to work with individuals like you, it will be so important in crafting that for them. And so I think so many aspects, but ultimately it's going to be personal and subjective. It's not going to be just for everyone at all times in all cases. And I really like that idea. It's personal, it's subjective, but we can find something that works for us and follow it, and it will help us live longer and have a better quality of life.
I think there's also seasonality to things that I often have conversations with patients or even athletes to think through. recognizing what you did 10 years ago or 5 years ago, or maybe now you have a young family, or this is, now it's November in 2025. What does this look like for you? What are easy things to implement now as opposed to during the summer? And I think that gives people permission to kind of pivot their plans. And I think that's really actually better most of the time. And so in the summer, maybe it's salads and smoothies, and now that maybe doesn't appeal or doesn't satisfy you. So yes, soups, broths, like, so your meal plan, your activities might be different, your, dynamic within your household might look different. And I think acknowledging that and then figuring something else out for this month, this season, is a really helpful way to kind of be successful with your healthy habits.
Yeah, the seasonal change. I definitely feel that. I feel like as it's gotten colder, I feel like I've gotten sick. So many of my friends have gotten sick. So many people at Beamer. It's like
You need some soup. We're in Utah in the winter. You got to get some soup.
Yeah, my body is reacting. It's like, oh yeah, that is so important. It's like when you don't prepare for that, yeah, your body will just react, and it's like, what's going on? Surely that's preventative. We just don't really consider that much until it's a problem, and like, oh yeah, I need to fix this now.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I learned so much. And thank you for being willing just to talk with us and share your insights. We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you so much for having me.